she is rather good at kind of set piece answers. It's unclear whether she's quite as good as absolutely spontaneous responses, which would be needed if the microphones between the case has been, was on. In a way, Donald Trump is the master of effective, even if ludicrous, interruption. So he will be the one whose hands will be slightly more tied by having the mics cut off, even though it's the Kamala Harris camp that wanted the mics on the hope that Donald Trump would be Donald Trump, and he'd say something absurd or bullying, something like that. But I think she can think of it quite positively.
Donald Trump and Kamala Harris will go head-to-head tonight in their very first debate of the presidential race. During a rally in Atlanta in late July, Vice President Harris called out former President Trump after his campaign said it would not commit to any debates.
Well, Donald, I do hope you'll reconsider to meet me on the debate stage. Because as the saying goes, if you got something to say it to my face.
Well, the debate was then agreed upon by both sides, but Donald Trump wasn't pleased with the channel hosting.
I think it's disgraceful, and I think ABC is a disgrace. I'd much rather do it on NBC. I'd much rather do it on CBS, frankly. I think CBS is very unfair, but the best of the group. And certainly I'd do it on Fox. I'd even do it on CNN. I thought CNN treated us very fairly the last time.
You will be able to listen to the ABC News presidential debate with Rosie Wright here on Times Radio. She's on from 1 a.m. and the debate starts at 2 a.m. But could it change the outcome of the election? Well, let's speak now to historian and TV presenter Sir Simon Schama. He watches American politics very closely. Simon, hello.
Hi, Hugo.
Lovely to be speaking to you. Look, I'll start with a very basic question. If someone is deemed to win a presidential debate, are they more likely to become president?
No. I think each election has a different story. I mean, the one I remember actually watching with a group of like-minded people, it has to be said, was John Kerry against George Bush. And everybody bar one, but he was very smart. It happened to be Clive James, actually. Thought without any question that Kerry had outsmarted Bush. And that, of course, actually was the problem, the outsmarting. It's a very tricky thing to do. You have to, in some sense, sort of contradict and make a case for your plausible presidency based on competence and knowledge. That may not necessarily be the case right now, without actually humiliating the other side, which actually has a kind of strong negative feedback effect, I think, on television. So that's one of many instances, I think. It's been said that very often a kind of throwaway line, like, there you go again, the famous one of Ronald Reagan, if it happens to hit a nerve and somehow a one-liner suggests in a much more expansive way what it's like to have that person as president, which in the case of Reagan was kind of wiseacre without being gloomy and prosecutorial, that can actually have an effect. So it differs from election to election. And I think this one has very specific demands to it, if you're Kamala Harris in particular.
What a strange alchemy. But look, let's talk a bit about what Trump and Harris can learn from presidential debates throughout history. In 1976, the incumbent Republican President Gerald Ford made this claim:
"There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe, and there never will be under a Ford administration."
And his opponent, Jimmy Carter, went on to win the election. And in 1980, Jimmy Carter accused Ronald Reagan of opposing Medicare.
These are the kind of elements of a national health insurance important to the American people. Governor Reagan, again, typically is against such a proposal.
Governor, there you go again.
As Sir Simon mentioned, Reagan's put down got a laugh from the audience, and he went on to win that election. In 2012, Mitt Romney was asked about pay equity for women.
We took a concerted effort to go out and find women who had backgrounds that could be qualified to become members of our cabinet. I went to a number of women's groups and said, can you help us find folks? And they brought us whole binders full of women.
The phrase binders full of women became a social media meme, and his opponent Barack Obama went on to win the election, of course. And in 2016, Donald Trump loomed behind Hillary Clinton when she was talking. This was one of the most memorable exchanges from those debates.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Yeah, because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
All of those debates, I suppose, no way of knowing how they were going to go before they went there. Simon Schama, do you have a favourite presidential debate throughout history?
Yeah, Kennedy and Nixon.
Right.
Sorry, one you didn't mention.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
that was the first one. And I mean, as I said, sort of each television debate really has its own specifications. Because it was so new, what was extraordinarily important was the kind of face of the debater, really. I mean, including makeup, famously. You know, Richard Nixon is said to have not helped himself by looking so sweaty and shifty. But it was only because sweaty and shifty seemed to play into a notion that had already been established by the Kennedy Democratic side that he was not to be trusted, that he'd been Eisenhower's lapdog, but was ultimately only in it for himself. Whereas Kennedy was this kind of breezy, fresh, clever, witty sort of person who exuded confidence rather than sweaty anxiety. So they were all very different. And, I think there's no particular kind of formula. And there's also no it's quite difficult to say, in which I don't, for example, think that the incredible blunder over Poland and the Soviet Union particularly hurt Gerald Ford. He was basically just America wanted someone really radically different from anything to do with the leftovers of the Nixon administration.
Danny Finkelstein's still with me. Danny, look, Simon has snapped up Kennedy-Nixon. Do you have a favourite presidential debate throughout history?
Well, I like that one because I think it's the initiator of the great myth.
Yeah.
Because the reason why Kennedy was famously supposed to have done better on television and on radio is that the people listening on radio were general rural people without televisions, and those people tended towards Nixon. So the truth about these debates is you appeal to your base voters and you can get them out. And occasionally, as obviously we've just seen with Joe Biden, they can be very important in terms of summing up what the problem is that people have with you already. So no one can think that Reagan saying, "There you go again," really changed much about the election, but it probably did reinforce those people who quite liked Reagan in the view that he had this kind of casual, cool and wit. So my view is that the evidence on debates, and people who've listened to me often on politics will know that I'll say this, suggests they don't make anywhere near as much difference as people suggest. The conventions do, after which, by the time the debates take place after the convention, I'm very dubious about, I think Simon was completely correct about what he said about Gerald Ford. I'm very dubious about how much difference they make. And sometimes these moments are selected by people because they summarize, that Reagan once said to Carter, "Are people better off than when you became president?" And not only did I not think that changed the election result, it wasn't even true. People were better off when Jimmy Carter had become president, even though they couldn't remember when that was.
But they just come to summarize what people decided they always thought afterwards.
Yes.
Simon, you've written about the importance of rhetoric in politics, and one would have thought that a debate like this was all about, look, it's a joust, it's all about fluency, it's all about being a mastery of facts and arguments. Then we have Donald Trump, who can do none of these things. How does that all make sense?
Well, I think the point about rhetoric, may have been good for in Lincoln's day, really, and even, but it's absolutely not true. First of all, the notion of rhetoric, may not. I wish it were as important as social media memes, but it self-evidently is not these days, alas. It used to be the case, actually, Hugo, that you couldn't actually get a university degree without passing a course in rhetoric. And when I was a Harvard professor, I remember finding serendipitously bookshelves full of courses for rhetoric, which were basically a 19th century updating of Cicero's De Oratore, written by a Scottish parson, very influential, 18th century Scottish parson called Hugh Blair. It's Hugh Blair, not Tony Blair. It's self-evident this is not the case any longer. And I'd also say to Danny's excellent points just a second ago, that this is sort of different in that the timing of the campaign is uniquely compressed. And also because actually, as recent polling, I think actually I'm very mistrustful of polls, but I do think actually there's a lot of evidence that the popular vote, as well as the vote in the swing states, is unbelievably tight, is basically virtually at a tie. So your point about whether or not the person with the most command of facts, I wish it were the case, competence and information, credible, factual competence would make the difference. But I'm not sure. And here again, I have I don't think the mission tonight is to appeal to the base. I don't think facts are going to change the Trump base's mind at all. In an election situation where things are so unbelievably tight, 1% or 2%, essentially Kamala Harris, if you're the debate coach, is appealing to people who are not politically engaged, who are not decided, who know very well the glories and the agonies and the absurdities of Donald Trump. But they still don't know. They probably will not have watched the convention, and they still don't know really what she's like and whether they can imagine her as president. So she has to be actually quite careful. She has to show them the kind of face of what a Kamala Harris presidency would really be like, more than anything else. And I know that sounds sort of very kind of Sunday supplement magazine, touchy-feely absurdity, and not to be taken seriously compared to the granite hard necessity of facts. I think she should call him out as a liar and someone, particularly on a particular case for him, tariffs are bound to make an economic situation better. There's absolutely that's because he doesn't understand that tariffs are actually paid by importers, not by foreign governments. And they're guaranteed to make life more expensive, not less expensive. She can do things like that. But the Hillary Clinton problem was being kind of smart-ass purveyor of a shopping list of worthy policies. Kamala Harris has to appeal to this tiny number of independents nationally who will win or lose her the presidency.
A difference between now and I suppose the debate with Clinton, well, two differences. One is we believe he's not going to be free to sort of roam around behind her like a shark, but also I believe they're going to be cutting off microphones while the other candidate is speaking. What do you think about that? Has there ever been another debate where that was even an issue?
I'm not sure, actually. I don't even know whether it's, but clearly, I don't think she should fret about it. There are many things she has to be concerned about. She is rather good at kind of set piece answers. It's unclear whether she's quite as good as absolutely spontaneous responses, which would be needed if the microphones between the case has been, was on. In a way, Donald Trump is the master of effective, even if ludicrous, interruption. So he will be the one whose hands will be slightly more tied by having the mics cut off, even though it's the Kamala Harris camp that wanted the mics on the hope that Donald Trump would be Donald Trump, and he'd say something absurd or bullying, something like that. But I think she can think of it quite positively.
Danny, would you agree that this debate is sort of Kamala Harris's to lose? It's all about her. We know who Trump is. Everyone knows who Trump is.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, Simon just gave you a masterclass there, and there's nothing much to add. That I certainly don't disagree with anything that he said. In the contest between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were both asked about the police, and essentially Hillary Clinton appealed to people who felt they'd been unjustly treated by police, and Donald Trump dealt with policemen. They were basically both just appealing to the people they thought might vote for them.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely right. Look, what a pleasure to get the chance to discuss it with both of you. So Simon Schama, thank you very much indeed. And Lord Finkelstein, thank you very much indeed.